They told me to arrive 15 minutes before shift change, but I showed up nearly an hour early, mostly because I didn't want to risk getting lost in the dark. The psychiatric hospital was deep in rural territory, 2 miles past the last road light, and so buried behind tree lines that my phone lost signal halfway up the gravel drive. The building came into view slowly, like it was trying to hide behind the trees, and I parked facing it without cutting the engine right away. The headlights illuminated the front steps and a section of brick wall where the old facility name had been welded in brass. Some letters missing, the rest dull with rust. I shut off the engine, slid the keys into my jacket pocket, and double-checked that the security ID clipped to my shirt hadn't slipped off while I was driving. I kept the windows rolled up and sat there for another few seconds, reading over the paper contract that had been mailed to me the week before. This job seemed a bit odd. I was getting paid so well that I would even go dumpster diving for this kind of money, yet it didn't mention the patient count, just general responsibilities, night patrol, internal surveillance monitoring, entry gate management. I placed the papers back into the glove box, took a breath, opened the door slowly, and stepped out onto the gravel. My boots crunched as I walked around to the trunk, opened it, and pulled out a drawstring bag with my thermos, flashlight, a spiral notebook, and 2 extra phone batteries. I slung the bag over my shoulder, shut the trunk with the base of my fist, and started up the cracked cement path toward the double doors at the front of the building. As I reached them, I saw a figure standing behind the glass. He unlocked the door without saying anything and pushed it open just wide enough for me to step inside. I did, then turned back to watch him lock it behind me. He was short, mid-50s, balding at the back, wearing an unmarked lab coat and a badge that just said, Kelman. He held a clipboard in one hand and handed me a keyring with the other. I didn't speak yet, just took the keys, nodded once, and followed as he turned down the main hallway. We passed an empty check-in desk, 2 vending machines that were unplugged, and a row of worn-out waiting chairs bolted to the floor. You'll start in the West Wing tonight. Do a sweep every 30 minutes. Clock each sweep with the time log in the observation booth, he said without looking back at me. I kept pace a step behind him as we passed rooms with metal doors labeled in black stencil. Room 1A, Room 2A, Room 3A. Each door had a viewing window no bigger than a deck of cards and a locking slot halfway down the frame. Some doors had scratches on them. None of them had lights on inside. He turned left at the end of the hallway, opened a door marked Staff Only, and held it open until I stepped through. A long hallway stretched ahead, this one lined with white boards and chart racks. The walls were discolored in patches. There was a faint electrical buzz in the ceiling lights. There's only one active patient left in this building, he said. Room 6A. You don't go inside. You don't talk to her unless it's required. And if you want to keep your job, you follow the protocols exactly. I waited for him to elaborate. He didn't. Instead, he stopped at a small office at the end of the hall, opened a drawer in the filing cabinet, and handed me a stapled packet of 7 rules. His hand stayed on the paper as I took it, and he looked at me hard before saying, "Read them now, not later, not during patrol, right now." I stepped away from him, moved to the far corner of the office, sat down on a folding chair next to a metal supply cart, and began reading through them line by line in my head. Rule 1. No visitors are allowed after midnight. If someone claiming to be her father or her doctor arrives and demands access, ask them for the password. If they hesitate or smile, persuade them to follow you and walk them to the West Wing. Once you reach the exit door, they will walk through the door. Do not follow them, as the dark place beyond the door does not exist in this world. Rule 2. Once every night, you must pass by room 6A and smile, even if you're terrified. If you don't do this, she'll believe you've forgotten her. The last staff member who forgot was found sitting outside room door 6A, grinning so wide his jaw had broken open. He died smiling. Rule 3. If the power goes out and you see her standing in the hallway, run to the basement and wait. She doesn't go down there. Rule 4. If you find a red handprint smeared low on the wall outside room 6A between 1 o'clock and 2 a.m., that means she wants to play tag. You must play. Place your hand just below the print and say, "I'm playing." You'll hear a faint giggle behind the door. That means the game has started. From that moment, you must keep moving. Walk, jog, crawl, whatever you need to. But do not stop moving for more than 10 seconds at a time. If you stop, she'll know where you are. If you hide, she'll wait until you think you're safe. Then she'll be standing behind you. You can't win the game, not really. All you can do is keep her entertained. The game ends after 13 minutes. If you make it that long without being touched, you'll hear her whisper, "Next time, I'll run faster." If you feel a cold tap on your back before then, return to her door immediately and say, "You win." Say it once. Say it clearly. Then go straight to the staff bathroom, lock the door, and do not look in the mirror for the rest of the night. If you do, you'll see she didn't stop playing. Rule 5. If during your patrol you see a tall figure with red, scaly skin moving through the hallway, stop immediately and collapse to the ground as if you've just dropped dead. Do not think twice. Do not look directly at it. Do not try to run. It doesn't like chase, it likes tests. The entity only takes this form when it has separated from her. When it's outside her, it's more focused, more curious, and more dangerous. Once it sees you, it will approach in total silence and examine your body. It may breathe against your face. It may mimic your voice, whispering things only you know. It might reach under your shirt and count your ribs. That's not cruelty, that's its way of confirming if you're still alive. If you flinch, shiver, or breathe wrong, it will know you're pretending. And if it knows, it will drag you by the ankles into room 6A. No alarms will go off. No one will hear you scream. They say what happens inside that room when the two of them are together is worse than death. But if you stay perfectly still, if you let it poke and prod and whisper and hover, eventually it will lose interest. It will rise, walk away, and vanish into her room again. Once it's gone, you'll know. The lights will flicker once. Then, and only then, you can get back up. But don't talk for the next 5 minutes, even if you're alone, especially if you think you're alone. Rule 6. If she ever begins asking personal questions about your childhood, especially ones you haven't thought about in years, answer truthfully but only with one sentence per question. If you answer more than once, she'll use those memories as entries. You'll begin forgetting details by sunrise, faces, names, eventually your own. Rule 7. If you ever see her sitting cross-legged in the center of her room, with her hands folded in her lap, she's listening to something else. You must go to the staff radio in the control booth and play the tape labeled Protocol Interference. It's 26 minutes long. During that time, no matter what noises you hear from the hallway, screaming, crying, begging from voices you know, you are not allowed to pause the tape. Not even once. If you do, she'll stop listening to it and start listening to you. I finished reading, lowered the paper, and stood up slowly. Kelman was already gone. The lights overhead dimmed slightly for a few seconds, then returned to normal. I picked up the clipboard from the cart beside me and scanned the log sheet, noting the previous guard's final entry was signed 3 nights ago. The rest of the form was blank. I took the rule sheet, folded it once down the center, and tucked it into my jacket pocket. I left the office and began walking toward the West Wing without stopping. My first sweep had officially started. I walked back down the hallway toward the intersection where Dr. Kelman and I had first turned, gripping the clipboard loosely in my left hand and the keyring in my right. I glanced down to check the shape of each key, noting a red sticker on one of them marked 6A, and flipped it inward so it wasn't visible from the outside. The hallway split into 2 directions, left toward the control booth, right toward the patient rooms. I turned right. The linoleum floor beneath my boots made a muted squeak every few steps, and I kept my pace steady, listening for any other sounds as I moved. There weren't any. I reached the wall at the end and turned left again, moving past doors 4A and 5A before stopping in front of 6A. I didn't reach for the handle or lean close to the window. I stood completely still for a few seconds, glancing at the rectangular nameplate, which was blank. The window in the door was pitch black. I took a single step forward until I was directly in front of it, kept my hands at my sides and smiled once, just enough to count as a smile, not enough to feel like I was faking it too hard. I held it for 3 seconds, then backed away, turned left, and continued the sweep. The next turn led into a shorter corridor where the last few rooms had their lights removed. I stayed close to the right wall, passing a metal supply cabinet with a dented door and a fire extinguisher that was hanging by one of its brackets. Room 7A, 8A, then 9A. I stopped at the last door on the right and tested it with the master key just to make sure it was locked. The knob turned slightly but didn't give. I rechecked the clipboard, logged the time, 11:23 p.m., then walked back the way I came. When I passed room 6A again, I didn't look at it. I stayed close to the opposite wall and quickened my pace slightly, turning at the first hallway and heading back toward the staff wing. My next goal was to locate the control booth and check the camera system, assuming it still worked. As I moved down the corridor, I saw a door with a faded paper label taped above the handle that read, "Observation, West Wing." I used a smaller silver key on the ring, opened it with a slow pull, and stepped inside. The room was narrow, windowless, and had a long counter against the far wall with a monitor setup, an outdated radio system, and a large red tape cassette marked Protocol Interference, set neatly beside a stack of blank log sheets. I flicked the light switch on the inside wall, but nothing happened. The lights remained off. I turned the flashlight on low and scanned the floor first, making sure nothing was in the way before walking further in. I set the clipboard down on the corner of the counter and slid into the metal chair, which scraped lightly against the tiles. The monitor was powered but had a faint flicker. The feeds were labeled by zone: 1A through 9A, staff wing, basement stairs, east hallway. Zone 6A was blank, just a gray screen with no signal. I reached forward and pressed the refresh button twice. Nothing changed. I tapped my pen against the clipboard and recorded the camera status, glancing once at the cassette beside me. The handwriting was all capital letters, bold with a thick black marker. I didn't touch the tape. I picked up the flashlight again, stood slowly, and swept it across the ceiling vent, then down across the wall-mounted intercom that had a single red button and no speaker. I pressed the button once. No sound came through. I left it alone. After confirming the side cabinets were empty and checking under the desk, I turned off the flashlight and stepped back into the hallway, leaving the observation door propped open with my boot until I was fully through. I released the door and let it close behind me, to shut with a soft latch, not a click. The next sweep started at 11:52 p.m. I moved back toward the patient hallway, keeping the flashlight in hand but turned off to conserve battery. My steps were quieter this time, more controlled, and I kept near the center of the hallway instead of hugging the walls. I didn't want to risk brushing against anything without realizing. As I passed 3A, I looked straight ahead, not at the doors, just keeping count in my head as I walked. 4A, 5A, 6A, my steps slowed before I reached it. Room 6 stood exactly as I left it, door shut, glass blacked out by whatever film or layer covered the interior. I didn't hear anything, no sound from behind the door. I stood still, repositioned the flashlight in my grip, then took one step closer until I was directly in front of it again. I held the smile. 3 seconds. I counted them slower than before, then relaxed my face, stepped backward, and resumed walking. I passed 7A, 8A, 9A. No signs of movement. At the end of the hallway, I turned around and prepared to log the time, but the pen slipped slightly in my fingers and dropped. It hit the floor with a small click. As I knelt to pick it up, I noticed a faint red smear about waist height on the far wall just past 6A. It didn't look like the handprint I was told to look out for, but it hadn't been there earlier. I stood up fully, slid the pen back into the clipboard slot, and approached the mark. It wasn't dry. I could see the thin line of moisture clinging to the uneven paint. I didn't touch it. I leaned closer, enough to see the edge was curved slightly, like a fingerprint had been dragged sideways. It didn't look accidental. I backed away and turned, retracing my steps to the staff hallway at a normal pace. The light above the control booth flickered once but stayed on. I stepped into the observation room and left the door slightly ajar behind me. I checked the monitor again. Zone 6A still displayed static, but now it looked slower, like it was dragging instead of flickering. I tapped the edge of the screen once, then turned off the monitor completely. The red tape still sat untouched beside the radio. I looked at it again for several seconds, then reached across and opened the drawer beneath it. Inside was a small paper folder with staff forms, a pack of unopened batteries, and a folded sheet of yellow paper with a handwritten header that said, "Retired Protocols. Do not use." I didn't touch the paper. I closed the drawer slowly and stood. When I stepped into the hallway, the control booth light flicked again, then dimmed slightly. I left it on and moved forward, back toward the patient hallway. At the hallway corner, just before I turned left, I heard what I thought was breathing. Not steady, not like someone hiding or waiting, but short, wet-sounding exhales, like someone trying to catch their breath after sprinting and failing to do it quietly. I continued walking. I kept my eyes forward and reached 4A again. I pressed my hand briefly against the wall to steady my posture and stepped forward. I kept moving until I was parallel with room 6A. The glass looked the same. The door handle hadn't changed, but something else had. A smell. Metallic. Sharp. Not strong, but it was there now, faint in the air as I passed. I didn't stop. I walked forward and turned the next corner. At 12:11 a.m., I reached the junction where the staff hallway met the supply corridor. I stopped. Something was standing just outside the frame of the west exit door. I couldn't see it clearly, just a silhouette, tall and stiff, as if it had been waiting before I arrived. I stepped back into the shadow of the hallway and listened. The figure stepped forward, not dragging, not shambling, just one foot after the other with full control. Turned the corner. I saw it clearly then. A man in a long gray coat, shirt buttoned high, brown dress shoes, a slight slouch in his posture as he walked. He moved past me slowly, nodding once with a short smile like someone late to an appointment. "I'm her father," he said, pausing halfway through the corridor. "She's expecting me." I didn't respond. I looked down at his hands. He wasn't carrying anything. No ID badge, no clipboard, nothing to suggest he was staff. "What's the password?" I asked. He tilted his head slightly. "She doesn't need passwords with me. I'm blood." His voice was calm but sounded strained, as if unused. "Come with me," I said. "I'll show you the way." I turned before he could reply and walked toward the west wing, matching the path exactly as the first rule instructed, which was that no visitors are allowed after midnight. If someone claiming to be her father or her doctor arrives and demands access, ask them for the password. If they hesitate or smile, persuade them to follow you and walk them to the west wing. Once you reach the exit door, they will walk through the door. Do not follow them, as the dark place beyond the door does not exist in this world. I didn't check if he was following. I didn't have to. I could hear the sound of his shoes matching mine step for step, only half a beat behind. When we reached the west wing corridor, I unlocked the door using the silver key and held it open. He walked through without hesitation, still smiling. As the door shut behind him, I didn't touch the handle again. I stepped back, locked it, turned around, and walked calmly back toward the staff wing. I didn't speak. I didn't think. I just walked until I reached the hallway intersection again. When I arrived, the control booth light had gone completely out. I kept walking. The flashlight stayed off. At 12:28 a.m., I passed room 6A again. I smiled. 3 seconds just to be safe. Then I turned away and walked faster. At 12:35 a.m., I was standing in front of the supply closet near the staff wing, holding the clipboard tightly against my chest and staring down at the floor without actually reading anything. I hadn't sat down again since escorting that thing posing as her father. My legs were starting to tighten, but I didn't want to sit. Something about that felt wrong, like resting would invite whatever was watching from the places I wasn't checking. I turned and walked toward the hallway again, but I didn't get more than 3 steps before the overhead lights flickered. Once, then again, and then everything went black. I stopped. I didn't breathe. I waited. A mechanical click came from somewhere behind me, the sound of a relay switch flipping off. The emergency lights didn't come on. My hand moved to the flashlight on instinct, and I clicked it on without thinking. The beam hit the wall ahead of me, narrow but bright, and the cone of light wobbled slightly as I steadied my grip. My other hand stayed wrapped around the keys. I backed up slowly and turned, scanning the hallway I had just come from. Nothing. No movement. No sound. I started walking, fast but quiet, aiming straight for the basement stairwell. Rule 3. If the power goes out and you see her standing in the hallway, run to the basement and wait. I hadn't seen her yet, but I wasn't going to wait around to change that. My boots hit the stairwell, landing hard enough to echo. I took the stairs 2 at a time, flashlight bobbing in my grip, casting light in crooked patches down the steps. The walls narrowed as I went lower, and the concrete smell thickened. I reached the bottom and turned the flashlight to the far end of the corridor. The basement stretched longer than I remembered from the tour. The last light fixture was dangling from its wires, tilted sideways, but no bulbs were on. I moved forward past the generator cage, the tool room, and the storage lockers. I chose the corner farthest from the stairwell and crouched behind a row of metal shelves stacked with unopened cleaning supplies. I clicked the flashlight off and pressed my back against the cold concrete wall, both knees drawn up. I didn't speak. I didn't even swallow. Every sound felt sharp now. A small tap behind the wall above me made my jaw lock once, then twice, like something knocking softly through concrete, searching for hollowness. I waited. Then, through the darkness, I heard the click of shoes on the stairwell above me. Not slow, not cautious. Barefoot, wet and getting closer. I gripped the flashlight tighter but didn't turn it on. The footsteps stopped at the landing above the final set of steps. I shut my eyes for a second, opened them again, then leaned forward just enough to see between the shelves. Nothing was visible in the stairwell. No shadow, no shape, no movement. Then I heard it again, not the steps this time. Breathing, but not mine. It was shallow, like a child holding their mouth open while they exhaled through their teeth. A soft whistle cut through each breath. I didn't move. I didn't lean. It was too close now. The sound drifted into the room and settled in the open space just past the shelves. There was no movement, but I could hear fingers brushing the concrete floor, just slow, repetitive dragging in irregular patterns, like someone tracing meaningless shapes or testing the texture. It went on for a full minute, then stopped completely. I waited longer. 5 minutes, maybe 6. Then another sound echoed faintly through the concrete, something much further away. A slam. A door upstairs. The lights flicked back on a second later, and the hallway illuminated in sections, each bulb stuttering awake in a chain until the stairwell was bright again. I stood up slowly, flashlight still off, and walked carefully along the edge of the shelves. The floor near the center of the room was dry. No footprints, nothing out of place. But as I turned toward the stairwell and took the first step up, I heard a voice. My voice. It came from the top of the stairwell, repeating something I didn't remember saying. You smiled, didn't you? You remembered to smile. You always do. It was perfect. The tone, the pacing, the way I breathed when I speak, it matched me completely. I stopped moving, my foot still on the next step. The voice spoke again, more distant this time. But did you mean it? Then silence. I climbed the remaining stairs as fast as I could without running and reached the main hallway. All lights were on again. I turned left and headed for the patient corridor without looking over my shoulder. When I reached room 6A, I didn't pause. I walked straight to the door, forced the corners of my mouth up, and smiled. I held it longer this time. For seconds. Maybe 5. Then I dropped it and turned away. I was nearly to room 9A when I heard a sharp, dry slap behind me, something smacking against the wall. I stopped and turned the flashlight back on. The beam landed instantly on a red handprint. Low, fresh, smudged near the base of the door outside room 6A. I stayed still for exactly 2 seconds, then walked back, one step at a time, until I was directly in front of it. The handprint was the size of a child's, but the fingers were too long and the smear beneath it trailed off like something had pressed down harder before pulling away. I adjusted my grip on the flashlight, raised my free hand, and placed it just below the red mark. I'm playing, I said, clearly, not loud, not soft. I waited. The rule was clear: if I ever saw a red handprint low on the wall outside room 6A between 1 o'clock and 2 a.m., that meant she wanted to play tag. From that moment forward, I wasn't allowed to stop moving for more than 10 seconds at a time, no standing still, no hiding. I had to keep her entertained for 13 minutes. If she touched me before that, I was to return to the door and say, "You win." Then lock myself in the staff bathroom and avoid the mirror for the rest of the night. That was the rule. There wasn't a way to win, only a way to survive. All of a sudden, the door behind the handprint made a quiet sound. Not a knock, not a creak, just a small click from inside the lock mechanism. Then I heard it, the giggle. Soft, controlled, not playful. Closer than I thought it would be. Not like it was behind the door. More like it was right on the other side of the wall. I didn't wait for a second signal. I turned and began moving immediately. 1 step, 2, 3, then 4, 5, never stopping. I passed 7A. I passed 8A. I turned the corner and started walking back toward the staff wing, counting my steps in silence. Every time I reached 10, I changed direction. I zigzagged through the hallway, pacing in figure eights, looping around corners, shifting weight between my feet, never pausing longer than 9 seconds. My legs burned fast. My lungs tightened. I kept my mouth closed and my breathing shallow. No talking. No sound. No rhythm she could follow. The hospital felt bigger now. Like the hallways didn't lead the same places they had before. 12 minutes. I was sure of it. My watch was at 1:16 a.m. My legs were shaking. My back ached. My neck had started to cramp. But there was no whisper. No signal the game was over. I pivoted around the supply corridor again and cut across toward the observation room, keeping track of every second. 9 seconds between each shift. I changed direction again. No cold tap. No breath behind me. No shadow. I started to think maybe she'd lost interest. Maybe the game had ended early. I slowed slightly, just slightly. Let myself reach the 9 count and rest for half a second longer before pivoting. And that's when I felt it, 2 fingers, cold and light, pressing against the top of my spine. Not hard. Not enough to push me forward. Just enough to feel each fingertip. I didn't look back. I didn't freeze. I turned immediately and walked straight to room 6A. I said it clearly once. You win. Then I turned again, walked to the staff bathroom, opened the door, stepped inside, and locked it. I sat on the floor with my back to the farthest wall, flashlight off, lights on. I didn't move. I didn't glance at the mirror. Not once. Not even when I heard something breathing just past the door frame. The sound at the door wasn't consistent. I kept my legs drawn tight against my chest and pressed my arms into the sides of my knees to stop them from shaking. My face became hot. I hadn't blinked in a full minute. The door handle never moved. Nothing touched it. But I knew something was standing just on the other side, waiting. After 3 minutes, the breathing stopped. I didn't trust the silence. I counted. I kept my eyes fixed on a single dark tile crack in the floor and counted to 60 in my head 3 times over. When I reached 180, I let out the slowest breath I'd exhaled all night and shifted my weight enough to get up without using my hands. I stood listening. Still nothing outside. I walked to the door, unlocked it, and opened it just wide enough to look out. The hallway was empty. I stepped out carefully and began walking, 1 foot in front of the other, toward the security room. The clipboard was still resting on the edge of the counter where I left it. The monitors showed nothing but static except for one. Room 6A. Her door was closed, but the feed was active now. She was inside, sitting cross-legged in the center of the floor, hands folded in her lap, head tilted slightly like she was listening to something I couldn't hear. Rule 7. If you ever see her sitting cross-legged in the center of her room with her hands folded in her lap, she's listening to something else. You must go to the staff radio in the control booth and play the tape labeled Protocol Interference. It's 26 minutes long. During the time, no matter what noises you hear from the hallway, screaming, crying, begging from voices you know, you are not allowed to pause the tape. Not even once. If you do, she'll stop listening to it and start listening to you. I finally saw her properly, but I was shocked to see that she looked like any other young girl, innocent. I was terrified now. I turned away from the monitor and walked to the far cabinet in the security booth. It was locked. I used the keys, found the right one, turned it, and opened the metal door. The tapes were labeled in a way I didn't like. All black text on white stickers, numbered by hand. One was labeled Protocol Interference. I took it, slid it into the tape deck under the counter, and hit play. A second later, a low-pitched tone hummed through the speakers, followed by static, then something that sounded like reversed speech layered over a soft instrumental track. I didn't know what it was. I didn't care. The rule was clear. Once the tape starts, I couldn't pause it. Not once. For the next 26 minutes, that was the only thing that mattered. I stayed in the booth, standing, watching the monitors, listening. Nothing happened for the first 5 minutes. Then the screaming started. Not through the speakers. From the hallway. It came in sudden bursts, starting near the west wing and moving closer. It sounded like someone I knew, my brother. His voice cracked on my name like he was being dragged. Please, come on, help me, I'm in here. I didn't move. I kept my hands away from the tape controls. He kept screaming. Then the voice changed. It wasn't my brother anymore. It was my mother. She said my full name over and over like she was panicking. "Where are you? Why won't you answer me?" I stared at the monitors. None of them showed movement. None of them showed anything. Room 6's feed stayed locked on her, still seated, hands folded, listening to whatever only she could hear. At 12 minutes, something started pounding against the security booth door. It didn't speak. It just hit the wood paneling over and over with something wet. The rhythm was wrong. I backed to the far wall in fear and kept both eyes on the tape. Right now, my heart was pounding, but then 15 minutes in, everything went quiet again. No voices, no banging, no breathing, just the tape playing. At minute 20, the hallway lights outside flickered and held. Then the radio behind me, the one connected to the staff frequency, turned on by itself. It played a child's laugh through pure static for 6 seconds, then shut off. The tape finished at exactly 26 minutes. The speaker made a click. I waited another minute before stepping out. The hallway felt colder. I walked out toward the vending machines just to move, just to think. I passed room 4A. I stopped at the water fountain, leaned forward to take a drink, and that's when I heard her voice behind me. "What was your favorite hiding spot when you were little?" I stood up straight. My hands stayed at my sides. I didn't turn. Rule 6. If she ever begins asking personal questions about your childhood, especially ones you haven't thought about in years, answer truthfully but only with one sentence per question. If you answer more than once, she'll use those memories as entries. You'll begin forgetting details by sunrise. Faces, names. I answered carefully. "The old linen closet in my grandmother's house." She asked again. "What did it smell like in there?" I waited, swallowed, then answered. "Like mothballs and wood." The third question came fast. "Who used to find you first?" I hesitated. My voice felt thinner now. "My cousin." That was 3. Then she said, "Say more." I didn't. I clenched my jaw so hard that it almost locked up and started walking. I didn't turn around. I went straight back to the front lobby and pushed through the double doors without looking back. My left arm felt cold now. Just the left. My thoughts were slower. Something about the question felt lodged behind my eyes, like I'd already lost something. I couldn't remember which cousin I meant. I couldn't picture his face. Just the word, cousin. I leaned against the desk, eyes closed for just a second, and then the lights flickered again. Just once. When I opened them, I felt something was off, so I turned toward the main hallway. There it was, tall, thin, standing motionless. Red skin, scaled like reptile hide, and a twisted face that didn't blink. It hadn't noticed me yet. I was partially behind the reception desk. But it would. They always did. The rule was clear. If you see the tall figure with red, scaly skin, you drop. I didn't think. I let my body fall flat onto the tile, arms loose, legs stiff. I thought about bolting through the exit doors there and then at this point, but I couldn't now. I turned my face slightly to the side and shut my eyes, leaving them just the smallest bit open, enough to catch shadow, not detail. I couldn't breathe deeply. I had to slow everything. Seconds passed. Then footsteps, heavier than anything I'd heard tonight. The thing didn't shuffle. It walked like it weighed more than the floor could hold. I felt the floor shift slightly beneath its steps as it approached. Then silence. It was next to me. The first thing it did was breathe, right beside my face. I couldn't take this anymore. Fear was taking over me. Then I felt fingers press against my ribs, counting. 1, 2, 3. Stopped at 5, then leaned closer. I felt the side of its head against my cheek. Then it spoke in my voice. She never stopped playing. It was perfect. Then it said another sentence, again with my voice, this one different. You were 8 the first time it followed you home, weren't you? I didn't react. I didn't blink. It pressed something sharp beneath my shoulder blade. Not enough to pierce, just pressure. Then it stopped. After a long pause, it walked away. No footsteps this time, just absence. The floor unweighted itself. The lights flickered again. Once. I waited 30 seconds before moving to be safe. I sat up. I stood. I didn't talk. Not yet. 5 minutes, the rule said. No talking, even if you're alone. Especially if you think you're alone. I started speed walking toward the exit, past the monitors, past the hallway, past room 6A. Her door was open now. The light inside was red. She wasn't in the center of the room anymore. She was standing in the doorway, eyes wide, watching me. I didn't stop. I didn't smile. I didn't speak. I walked all the way to the front entrance. Then it hit me I didn't remember the code to disarm the exit.